Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Henry. Henry's an individual that reached out to me about a few interesting things he's experienced over the years out there in the state of Washington. So welcome to the show, Henry. How's it going?
Oh, pretty good.
Awesome.
Pretty good. Glad to be on.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit beforehand. It was a great conversation, and we let's make the best use of our time because I know you've got a ton to share. And I say, Henry, go ahead, take us back to when this first started happening for you, and we'll have a good time.
Okay, I'm just going to start with my first encounter. I grew up in South Central Washington, around the Mount Adams area. I've lived here all my life, hunted around here all my life. All my grandma and grandpas, everybody just lived around here. So, let's see, what was it? Yeah, 2008. Well, it was spring of 2016. It was the spring turkey hunt, and I had some private property to hunt on, and some friends of mine, they own some cabins up. It's pretty high up on the mountain, but so I got permission to go up there, and it's a gated community. There's only one road in. There's only one road out. There's nobody that can get in there, and I happen to have the key, and I knew I was by myself. But the week prior to the turkey hunt that came up, I had went up there to this area that had been logged off, and I was down kind of over the north side of the logging area. There's a creek that runs down through there with a pretty good meadow, and we've always known that the turkeys like to hang out in there. It's just, I don't know why, but they always just hung out in that area. So I went up there by myself the week prior, and I had made a blind about 10 yards into the tree line of this L-shaped meadow, and I'll explain that more to you here in a minute. But the right side of this blind was up against a tree, and I just took baling wire and side cutters, and I just took sticks and limbs, and anyway, I built this blind. It actually looked like a one-seat outhouse, and the door opened from the back. And I had a 5-gallon bucket with a board that I would set on, and I had a little shooting port in the front that faced the middle, of course. And I didn't have to, but I had put a top on the blind. I had extra sticks, and so I thought, well, I just put them up there. I didn't need to, but I didn't tie them down or anything. I just laid them up there. So anyway, I got done, and I backed out of the area and went home and waited for the next weekend. And so the next weekend came around, and it was Saturday morning. I was a little anxious to get up there, so I took off a little early. It was dark when I got there. So I decided, well, I'm just going to walk up there and get in the blind anyway, even though it was dark. It didn't really have a light with me. I had a light with me, but I didn't use it. I had a little red pin light that you could barely see the ground with. But when I got out of my pickup, well, when I came up the hill, I'm about anywhere from 5 to 7 miles from the gate up on the mountain. And I came to the first landing. It was a logged off section of about 250 acres off to my left-hand side. And there was 2 landing sites. There was the first one that I came to, and then about 3/4 of the mile up the road was the second landing. And right after that, it would drop down the hill, cross the creek, and there was a road that went up on the hill just a little ways and stopped. Well, up on the right-hand side of that was this flat area, and there was a L-shaped meadow up in there. So, and in between these 2 landings, there was an intersection that turned and went up the hill. And about 2 miles from that intersection up on the hill, we have some friends that have 2 cabins up there, and that we have access to. We can go there anytime we want. And it's right on the creek too. So when I got there, I thought I was just anxious to get going. So I thought, well, I'll just load up and start walking up there to the blind. So I got out of the truck, and this kind of plays in later on, but I got out of the truck and I cleaned my shotgun the night before when I was loading up my shotgun, and you're only supposed to put 3 rounds in it. And I noticed that I put 4 in there, and I thought, oh, dang it. So I put my 5th round in, and I realized I forgot my plug. So I was like, well, shoot. If I get caught, I'm going to get a ticket. So just load it up. So I did. I put 6 rounds in of 3-inch. I used 3-inch double-aught or Magnum double-aught buck. And that's what I like to shoot out in this area because it's a lot more wide open than it is over in the, in the Gifford Pinshot. That's more of your jungle, tropical stuff. But so anyway, I got everything ready, and I took off walking up the road. And then, like I said, I was going to drop off this second landing and go down across the creek. But at the last second, I thought, wait a minute, I'm just going to cut up. When I hit the intersection, I just took a right, and I went up the road headed towards the cabins. And I walked up there, I don't know, 100, maybe 200 yards. And then I cut into the left, and I walked down to the creek. And I got down to the creek, crossed the creek. And it wasn't real big. It wasn't small, but it's not real big. It was pretty easy to cross. And it was real quiet. It was all wet out, super quiet going in. And so I go up the other side, and it's about 40 yards from the creek to the blind, but I was above it, and I had to turn and walk down to it. And it was still fairly dark out, but it was just starting to kind of get light enough where I could, just barely see the ground. So when I got to my blind, I had noticed that the top had been taken off the blind. Like the whole roof had just been like taken off, and it was laying in front of the door. All these sticks were laying in front of the door, so I couldn't even open the door. And I was just looking at this like, how did these sticks fall? I know the wind didn't do it, and I was just kind of looking around. So I thought, okay, well, whatever. So I just picked the sticks back up, and I quietly just put them back up there. I don't even know why I put them up there, but I did. So I went in, I opened the door, I went in, and I was sitting in the blind. I put my shotgun on the right-hand side of the blind because I'm right-handed, and I put my backpack on the left side and shut the door. And I was just sitting there waiting for it to get light out. And it was starting to get, fairly lighter and lighter. So I kept hearing stuff that I didn't really pay attention too much about what was going on. I mean, just normal forest sounds, I guess. But so anyway, I'm sitting there, and it's getting lighter and lighter, and I'm thinking about getting my stuff out and getting ready to go. But I should tell you about this meadow first. That I was facing west. I was looking right at Mount Adams. This meadow was about 60 yards long. The right-hand side was about 60 yards long, and the left-hand side was about 40. And I'm about 10 yards inside the tree line on this, so I'm about 50 yards to that shortest corner. And then the meadow made an L-shaped turn, and it went towards the creek about, I would say, 30 yards maybe. And there was just a row of trees between that meadow and the creek. And it dropped down into there. So anyway, I'm sitting there waiting, and I'm getting ready to go. And these turkeys, they would roost up. And it was a pretty good sized hillside. It went up to the top of the mountain, was probably about 3 miles, I would say. So it was a pretty good hillside, but it wasn't real steep. And these turkeys, they would come out of roost, and they would always walk across this meadow. And we've done pretty well in there turkey hunting, but they would cross, and they'd go down and get their water, and then go whichever direction they went. But so I was just getting ready to get my stuff out. And it's kind of a flat light situation where it's just kind of between daylight and dark. And I all of a sudden, that noise that I was hearing, it sounded like it sounded like I could hear somebody talking. And the more I listened to it, the more it sounded more and more like people talking. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you hear people talking and they're just like right on the edge of your hearing. You can't make out what they're saying. That's what it sounded like to me. So I was looking around. I could see through the walls of the blind. It was just sticks. You had little gaps in there. And I was looking every direction, trying to figure out where this was coming from. I even opened up the back door. And I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So I got up and I stuck my head out the blind and was just listening. And then I figured out that the talking was coming from the front of me to the left. So I sit down and I'm listening to them talk, and I got kind of pissed about this, because I'm like, I put all this time and effort into it, and now there's people up here hunting. And then I got to thinking, I was like, there's absolutely no way somebody would have walked up here, because they couldn't have got through the gate, because nobody had a key but me. I'm 10 miles from any house in any direction. To the north of me is the Yakima Indian Reservation, so I know nobody came off there. So I thought, oh, dang it, man. So I was just getting ready to go out the blind. I was going to go over there and tell these guys, get your stuff and get out of here. You're not supposed to be here. Get out. I mean, I wasn't even going to take my shotgun with me. I was just going to walk over there and just tell them, just get out. So at this point, I sit there for just a few more minutes, and it got a little lighter and a little lighter. And I mean, it was getting fairly light, really. So I was just getting ready to get out, and I looked over to my left, and I noticed movement coming from my left side. It was coming to the right, out towards this meadow. And I thought, well, what's going on here? Is one of the hunters coming out to sit in the meadow right there, or what? So I was just sitting there watching to see what they were going to do. And then a few seconds went by where I didn't see any movement. And then probably about, 5 yards from the end of that meadow, we have a lot of low, like pine trees and oak trees. It's like low scrub stuff. It's not like the Gifford Pinchot, where it's really like a jungle, really. But so it's a lot more open. But so I seen movement coming out underneath this tree, and it was bent over at the waist. It was like a 90-degree bend, like at the waist, it was bent over, ducking down under these tree limbs. And when this thing came out, it stood straight up, just straight up about 2 feet out of the trees, and it stopped. And it took me a minute to figure out what. I was like, was that a hunter? I was like, no. And then I was like, okay, ghillie suit. And I was like, no. And then I was like, wow, that looks like a bear. And I was like, no, that's not a bear. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me. I knew exactly what this was. I was like, because my grandpas would talk about these things, logging and stuff. So then I started to panic. A million things went through my mind at that point. And I really started to panic. So I reached over for my shotgun. I was going to grab it. And I thought, no, don't panic. Don't panic. I was really starting to panic at this point. So I thought, don't panic. Just don't panic. Just stay here. Don't move. Well, this thing was facing north, and I was looking west, and I had the wind in my face. So I didn't think about this till later on, but so this thing was just standing there. It never moved. It never looked at me. It never looked in any direction. It just stood there still, about 2 feet out from the trees, looking north up on this hillside. And then it made a sound. It yelled. I guess that's what you would call it. But it sounded like it said myrrh with a sharp chirp on the end of it, like a real low, loud, like a myrrh, like a bird chirp. I can't do what it did, and I'm not even going to try it because I sound like an idiot when I do. But anyway, and I think this whole experience lasted, I know I've said 10 minutes before, but actually kind of looking back, counting it, I think it was more around 7 minutes. So anyway, this thing yelled up on the hillside 3 times, and it stood there didn't do anything. It just stood there. So after about a minute, it slowly backed up. It bent over again and went under the tree limb that it came out from. and it disappeared in the trees. So all of a sudden I see movement going from right to left where it came from. And then I thought, man, I'm going to run. I'm out of here. And I just thought, don't do this. Just stay here. Just don't move. Because I wasn't sure where it went, and I knew how that meadow worked, how the ground laid out and everything. And I was just like, just stay here for a few minutes and let's just see what happens. You know, it's not coming towards you. Just stay here. So I'm sitting there, and about, I don't know, I think a minute or so goes by, or 2 minutes. I'm not real sure, but anyway, I was kind of in a panic mode at this point. But anyway, I see movement come out again, and it did the same thing. It ducked underneath its tree limbs, and it came out, and it stood straight up again in the same spot, about 2 feet out from the trees, and it was still looking north. It never looked at me, and never looked any direction. It never did anything. It was just totally still. And it did the same thing. It hollered 3 more times up on the hillside with that same, it was like a murr with a sharp chirp on the end of it. And it stood there for about another minute, maybe 2 at the most. And then, anyway, I was starting to panic again. And I remembered, you know, hey, I got 6 rounds in that shotgun, you know, and I had 2 in my pocket. So that's, yeah. So at this point, I'm watching it, and it flicked its wrist. It never moved the whole arm. It just flicked its wrist like a couple times. Just, I could see it moving. And this one, it was black, but it looked silver. And it was I think it was about 7.5 feet tall. And when it flicked its wrist, I seen movement again coming out from the left to the right through these trees. And I thought, there's another one, you know. And I was really starting to lose it at this point. And I just kept yelling in my brain, just don't move, man. Just don't move. Work through it. Just keep it together. So this other one, it did the same thing. It was bent over. But I don't think it knew it had as much, it didn't have room to stand behind the first one. So when it came out, it was kind of at a 45-degree angle, and it came out to the left shoulder of the one that was standing there. And it was facing like northwest. It was about a 45-degree angle to the one that was standing there. And it was black, but it looked silver too. By now it's starting to get fairly light out. And I'm wanting to run, but I just kept telling myself, just don't move, man. Just don't move. So this one that came out was about 6.5 feet tall. It was about a foot shorter. I'm 6'3". This one was about 6.5. It was about a foot shorter than the first one that came out. But this one, it looked black, but it looked gray. I noticed on this one that it had 2 horizontal black stripes on it, on its side. One under the armpit and one by the hip bone right here. And I thought, wow, that's kind of weird. But about that time, it moved just a little bit to the right, where not completely 90 degrees to me, but it moved enough, and it stood there for just a few seconds, and it moved just slightly again. I could tell this was a female because I could see the right breast. And then the hands were more in front of it, where the first one, the hands were just hanging down to the sides. But this one had its hands in front of it. I could just see from the shoulder to the elbow. And then as I'm looking at it, I noticed, I realized that not only is this a female, but I think she's holding an infant. Because I could see over her right breast, I could see just a little bit of a head sticking out. It was like right between her boobs. I could just see just the back of the head. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm about 98.5% sure that that's what she was doing. She was holding holding it by the rear end, and the stripes going around her side was the arms and legs holding onto her like it was like bear hugging her. So anyway, they stood there for about a minute, and this one did the same thing as the first one. They were just looking up on the hillside. They never, I don't honestly think they even knew I was even there. And I'll kind of explain that here later from what I think happened. But so they stood there for about another minute, and then he either grunted or huffed. He just went, ugh. And as soon as he did that, they turned, and thank God they walked to the west. They walked across the meadow away from me. And they went, she fell right in lockstep with him. It was like they were marching. When they moved left leg, right leg, left, it was like, so she followed him across the meadow, hit the tree line, and went up into the trees, and they disappeared. So I sat there for about 5 minutes in like panic mode, trying to just calm down. And I was looking around the whole time because I was like, I was thinking, what's he hollering for? I think it was more of a rendezvous, or they were trying to meet up with others like him. That's my theory on this. So after about 5 minutes, I got my stuff, and I stepped out the back door, and I was looking around. It was pretty well daylight by then. And I was looking around because I was like, I don't want to run into any more of these. So I really looked all around me, and I kept the blind between me and them, and I went straight up the hill. I know I said stealthily but what I mean by that is I didn't break nothing. I didn't touch nothing. I didn't make any sounds at all going back up that hill. And I didn't take any time. I mean, I wasn't horsing around with this one. I wasn't running, but I wasn't horsing around. And I went up to about where I crossed, and then I crossed back over the creek, and I hit the road, and I came down and got in my truck, and I left. So, yeah. So anyway, I get home. Yeah, it took me about 3 months to get over that. I quit hunting because of this until that was 2016. Yeah, about 2019, I started hunting again because it really got me, and it affected me bad because I've always hunted by myself, and I just never ran into anything like that, And you hear people say, I've been hunting this area for 40 years. Well, you know what? And they say, I never seen anything. And I say, well, you know what? I did the same thing until that day. The color of their hair, how I said they look black, but they look gray. Mm-hmm. I didn't figure this out until about 5 months later. And this is my theory on this. Me and a buddy went out bear hunting that September. I guess I did go hunting, but I went with a buddy. And he ended up getting a bear, but from a distance, it looked brown. But when we walked up on it, it was blonde. And I was like, wait a minute, is this the right bear? So I went back a little ways and looked at it. It looked brown, but when I walked up on it, it was blonde. I got to looking at the fur, and the very quarter inch of the tips of the fur were brown, but the rest of the hair was blonde. So at a distance, it looked brown, but when you got right up on it, it looked blonde. So I think what happened was that they had silver tips on their hairs is what I think happened. That's how they look black. I think the main hair was black, but they had silver tips on their hair. So they looked like a two-tone color. And I'm not really sure why that would be, but I've heard other people saying the same thing. They look black, but they look gray.
Right.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think this is, well, the area that I was in, I think it's a migration route through there because it's on the east side of Mount Adams. There's like, I don't know, a million acres of Yakima Indian Nation land out there that nobody's in. I mean, there's a major river that runs right up through there. Nobody goes there. So, as a matter of fact, the area I was in was the east side elk calving grounds for Mount Adams. So, yeah. And then since then, I've had 4 other people tell me of encounters in the same area. These 2 guys told me one time that they were in the same area. They were about a mile, actually about 2 miles west of where I was at, and they come up over a hill, and there was a pretty deep ravine right there, and they were kind of going down into that ravine, and all of a sudden they looked up into the ravine, and both of them witnessed this. They seen one of them one Bigfoot walking down that draw, and they watched it walk about a mile down this draw until it disappeared, and they turned around and ran out of there and got out, and it never went back. So That was one encounter that I've been told of since then. And then another one was with another turkey hunter. Him and his son was out there. They were about 2 miles south of me, though. They were a little ways further down the mountain than I was, at an old abandoned farmhouse. And it was him and his son. His son had just got his hunter safety card, and they had the turkey decoy set up in this meadow. They were kind of like me. They went in the week before and they built a blind, but it was just a U-shaped blind where they just put limbs and stuff up to about when they're sitting on a chair, they could just see over it. But he said he started calling, and after about 10 minutes of calling, he looked down to the right-hand side of this meadow, and he seen what he thought was a guy in a ghillie suit was running from oak tree clumps to oak tree clumps, kind of moving up on him on the right-hand side. And he said it got within about 25 yards of him, and he thought, man, I don't want this guy shooting at these turkeys, thinking, so when he got within 25 yards, this thing went bounding between these clumps, and he stood up and said, hey, we're over here, don't shoot. And he said, this thing stopped. And then it stood full up, and then he knew he wasn't dealing with a human. He said this thing had a look of surprise like you wouldn't believe on it. He said his eyeballs were big, his mouth was wide open, and he said this thing spun around and took off running the way it came in there and just disappeared in the trees. So that was another sighting that happened in the same area, just a few miles south of where I was at. There was one more sighting. What was it? I can't remember now. But anyway, so at this point, I thought about this for about 3 months. I just could not get this out of my mind. But at the time, I didn't know who, anybody to tell this to. So I just kept it quiet. I never told anybody for 8 years until May of 2023. And I'll get to that here in just a minute. But so, yeah, I didn't know anything about. I don't know if they even had Bigfoot podcasts back then, or if, I know they had researchers, but I didn't know anything about that stuff at that time. But another sighting, my wife had one in 2018. We live about 15 miles east of the site where I had my first one. And my wife was homesick one day. Well, we have 10 acres on another. It's a little river. It's not a big river. It's a little river. And we have 10 acres. And our back fence parallels this river. And from the back fence to the tree line, there's a row of trees there. It's about 30 feet between the trees and the fence. And then right past its hedgerow of trees, there's the river's right there. So my wife was homesick one day from work. And anyway, I got home from work and I walked in and she was just all in a panic state of mind. And I was like, what's wrong with you? She's like, you're not going to believe what I seen today. And I was like, what'd you see? And she was a Bigfoot. And I was like, a Bigfoot, huh? Really? Where at? She goes out by the back fence. I said, well, what happened? Well, she was laying in bed sick and she got up to get something to drink and get some hydration. And as she was walking back to bed, she looked out the dining room window at the back fence, and she seen this Bigfoot walk out of the hedgerow of trees. It would have taken a left and walked north along the fence. It was about 100 yards or so up this fence line, and then it went kind of down the hill and back through the trees down to the creek. And I thought, really? So it scared her to death. She went and jumped back in bed and put the covers over her face until I got home. So anyway, she just thought for sure it was going to come through the door. So anyway, I went out there and looked, and sure enough, you can actually see where something had went through the summer fallow. Well, it's the grass, we call it. It grows in the summertime, then it dies off. Anyway, you could actually see where something had walked down through there and then where it went down through the trees, but I didn't see anything. So anyway, I got back, told her, I said, yeah, it looks like something walked through there, but you can't really see any footprints. You can just see the grass smashed down and stuff like that. And she's like, well, you actually act like you believe me. And I said, yeah, I do. But I wanted to tell her at that point, but I just didn't. So that was 2018. Yeah. So anyway, nothing really happened until 2022. in July of 2022, my son was home from the Army on leave, and he'd brought two of his Army buddies with him. And the landowner's son that owns the cabins, I'll call him Cal. He's a pretty good kid. Him and my son have been buddies since first grade. And anyway, so it was 4th of July, and we had went up to the cabins, and we were going to do 4th of July at the cabins. But I didn't get up there until about 9:30. The cabins, they're about 2 miles away, straight up the hill from where I had my first sighting. So, yeah, so I got up there. It was just about dark, and there's a gate you got to go, another gate. So I went through the gate, and as you go through the gate, it's about 100 yards up to the creek, and you got to cross the creek, and it's not a very big one. But anyway, so after you cross the creek, you take a right and you go up to the cabin, and it's about 40 yards up to the cabin. So anyway, when I got there, I had just bought a couple of AGM Rattler 640s. They're thermals, and then Cal, he had just purchased a pretty high-end IR Nod. So the boys, they wanted to go play with them and stuff. So I was like, all right, yeah, go ahead, So I was in the cabin trying to get the fire and stuff going, and they were down by the creek, and they were looking through the thermals and stuff. And yeah, like I said, I was trying to get the fire going, and all of a sudden the door blasts open. Here comes my son and Cal in there, and they were just talking a mile a minute. And as a matter of fact, they scared me coming through the door. I don't think they even opened the doorknob. I think they just pushed the whole door in. But anyway, they were kind of panicking and all excited. And I was like, hey, wait, slow down, man. What are you guys talking about? And my son goes, hey, Dad, there was something down there barking at us like a dog. But it didn't sound like a dog. It was too deep, and it just didn't sound right. And I was like, okay. And then he said all of a sudden it started growling at us, but it wasn't a dog. It was just way too deep for a dog. And then it kind of started clicking in my mind. I was like, why tonight? Why do we got to do this right now? So I said, just stay in the cabin. Give me one of those. Give me the thermal. And I had my shotgun with me, but it's not a hunting shotgun. It's more of a riot. But so I grabbed my shotgun. I said, just stay here. I'm going to go down there and look around. So I went down there, and I was kind of nervous about it, but I went down there and I looked all around. I had a really good high beam flashlight and I had that thermal on me. I was just looking around. So I crossed the creek, and there was a hedgerow on the other side of the creek going up past the cabin of trees. And I kind of walked up in there a ways and was looking around. I didn't see anything. So I went back to the cabin, and I told him, I said, I didn't see nothing, man. So probably whatever it was gone. But I kind of had in the back of my mind what was happening. But I didn't tell him anything. So I just told him, just stick around the cabin for a while. Don't go outside for a bit. So anyway, off the east side of the cabin, they have a porch right there, and it's enclosed. You can't get off of it. It's about 10 feet to the ground. And then the creek runs right by the porch right there. But across the creek, there's a bank there. And anyway, the boys decided to get out their rifles and pistols, and they went out there and shot up the dirt for about 20 minutes, just pretty much wasting ammo and having a good old time. But so they got all done with that and went back into the house or the cabin there. And so I thought, well, I like to reload 223 brass and stuff. And so while they were in there having a good time partying and stuff, I just went outside. You have to go through the cabin, through the door, and come around the outside. And, I was picking up brass. And I was out there for about 5 minutes picking up brass. And I mean, dude, this yell from the east of me, this thing yelled like I have never in my life heard. I could feel the ground shaking. I could feel my lungs vibrating. This is how loud this thing yelled at us. And I think it was about 150 yards away. Man, I stood straight up and looked at it, and I remember saying, what is that? I'd never heard anything like that before, and I thought, man, it's time to get back in the cabin. So I went back in the cabin, and the boys were like, what was that? I said, I don't know, man. I don't know what that was. So I said, just turn the music off. Let's just sit here for 10 minutes, and let's just see what happens. So we did. We waited around for about 10 minutes. Nothing happened. We were all quiet and sitting there. So I said, well, I guess I said, well, whatever it was, I don't know what that was, but let's just do whatever we were doing. So they started milling around talking, turn the music back up and stuff. So I sit there for about 5 minutes and I thought, well, it's probably gone. So I went back out the cabin door and I went back around and I was looking with the flashlight. I didn't see anything. I didn't have no weapons on me or nothing. And so I went back to picking up shell casings, and I was doing it for about 5 minutes. And to the north of us, this thing, it went from the east, it went up the hill, and it was just north of us. And I think it was only about 100 yards, and this thing did it again. I mean, this thing was vibrating the windows, man. And I took off running for the cabin door, and I had to go all the way around and get in. So, and I said, man, did you guys hear that? And they're like, yeah, what was that? I said, I don't know, man. I don't know what that is. And he goes, man, my son goes, man, I could feel my lungs vibrating, Dad. And I said, I know. I was outside. So anyway, we sat there for about 10 minutes and nothing happened. So I was kind of nervous, and I went out on the front porch where you come in the door. There's a porch there too. So I went out on the front porch. I was just kind of looking around up on the hillside with the thermal and stuff. I didn't see anything. So about 5 minutes went by. This thing had came down. It was on the east side of that cabin, and it did it again. I mean, it flat rattled the freaking doorknobs on this thing, and I'm like, all right, I've had enough. This really pissed me off this time. I went back in the cabin, and I grabbed my shotgun and a thermal and a light, and I said, I'm going to find this thing. Who's going with me? I was just going to kill it. I didn't care at that point. And my son goes, well, I'll go with you. And then one of his army buddy goes, I'll go with you too. The other two wouldn't leave. They're like, I ain't going out there. I said, I don't care who's not going. I'm going out there. So anyway, they grabbed their rifles, and he goes, Dad, where do you think it's at? I said, I think it's on the other side of a slash pile. Well, about 100 yards from the cabin on the east side, there's a big, they had it thinned and logged off in there. There was a big slash pile right there. And then about 50 yards past that, there was another creek that went down. And I said, I think it's between that slash pile and that creek right there. And I said, let's go. So I did. I went charging right out there, man. And well, we got within about 25 yards of the slash pile, and I said, I think it's right on the other side of the slash pile, man. So get ready to go. So my son, he started getting scared. He's like, Dad, I don't want to do this, man. I said, I don't care if you want to do it or not, man. We're going to go out here. We're going to find this thing. And he goes, I'm not going any further. And then his buddy goes, I don't want to do this either, So they started getting scared. I said, well, I ain't going out here by myself, He said, well, you better go back to the cabin. And I was like, this is horse crap, man. Here you guys are in the freaking army, and you guys are scared to go out here and see what this is. But anyway, I was kind of irate about that. But anyway, I'm kind of glad we didn't do it now. But so anyway, that was our second experience up there. We had one more we had one more. We elk hunt up there too. So it was me and my daughter and a coworker. We had something. I was putting my daughter on a stand, and I moved my coworker about 100 yards down the ridge from her, and I went back up to her and I said, I'm going to go down in this valley, and they usually run up through here, and you see anything with horns, it's hair tag in our county. So any elk with hair, you can shoot. So I said, if you see hair just on an elk, just start shooting. Just make sure you get it down. Well, right behind her, it was 50 yards behind her, man. Something, I'm sure what wood knocks are. This thing, this thing sounded like it was a 10-inch log. It smacked this tree 3 times so hard it sounded like lightning. Matter of fact, my daughter said, what was that? And I was looking over her right shoulder back there, and I said, I think it's time to go. So I didn't tell her what it was. But anyway, we turned around and left and got out of there because I just didn't want to deal. I didn't want to leave my daughter there alone, and a coworker. He was kind of elderly anyway. I just didn't want to leave him there alone. So I said, let's just go. Let's just get back to the cabin. We'll go out another direction later on. So and that's what we did. So that was our third encounter up there, and I haven't really been back there since. Yeah, it's just crazy. I've tried to get people to go up there, but up until this point, I didn't really know who to contact or It's never been touched by any researchers in that area. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, I think it's a pretty prime spot in there.
Oh,
Yeah, and
wow.
there's an old campground in there that I have. Yeah, I have access to this whole thing. And the creek actually runs right beside the campground. It's pretty nice in there, really. But it's on private property, and I've got the key to that campground. So we would be probably 5 miles from nobody can get in there. I mean, once I shut the gate, that's it. And then there's a gate on the campground too. So
That's wild. So
yeah, it's just an interesting area.
have you ever reached out to anyone like anyone from the BFRO or anyone about the area, or they just don't want to go?
Well, that's kind of another story in itself, really.
Okay.
Let's see, April of 23. I was kind of flipping through my computer, and I happened to just run across the BFRO website.
Mm-hmm.
It's just ironic how this whole thing happened, but then I got to looking at it, and I was like, wow, that it showed, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, and I got to reading through it and looking at it, and then I realized, wow, you can go on expeditions. I didn't know they even had expeditions for people, just like me to go on. I thought it was all these, academics and serious people that always went on the expeditions and stuff, but I found out that it wasn't. So I went in and I asked my wife, I said, hey, you want to go on a Bigfoot expedition? And she looked at me like I just jumped off a cliff. I said, no, serious. Do you want to go on one? And she's like, sure. I don't think she was taking me real serious on this one, but anyway, I got a hold of the BFRO and I signed us both up. And anyway, they sent us the papers and we paid our fees, and we were both pretty nervous on this one. But it happened to be up at the Olympic Project, the BFRO and the Olympic Project in August of 2023. That's where we ended up going. But before we went, we got interviewed by one of the lead researchers. And one of his questions was, he asked my wife, he goes, have you ever had an experience? And she said, yeah. And she told her the story that she had. Well, I'd never told my wife, I'd never told anybody this story before. And I thought, you know what? If he asked me, I'm going to tell him the truth. And sure enough, he asked me, have you ever had an experience? And I said, yes, I have. And he goes, do you mind telling me it? I said, nope, I sure don't. I'll tell you. So I ended up telling him the story. Well, about 3/4 of the way through this story that I just told you guys, I look over at my wife and she has this look on her face like, what are you talking about? Like that befuddled look, like that bewildered, like, what? You never told me this? Kind of that look, So anyway, when I was done, I was shaking so bad when I got done with that story. I had to hand the phone to my wife, and I had to get up and walk around. And she even told the investigator, man, he's shaking bad right now. I don't know. It just kind of took me back to that day. But so anyway, we ended up going up there to the Olympic Project. We had a sighting the first night. I was with Scott. I was on Scott Taylor's team. We had one walk out in front of me about 30 yards away. It was downhill on the trail. There was 3 of us that were looking at that one. And it ended up squatting down and doing the peekaboo up over the bush and around the trees, and then it crawled off. It laid down on its stomach and it crawled off into the trees. And so that next morning, we found either 12 or 15 footprints right behind our camp. It was only like 150 feet behind our camp. They casted. It was either 6 or 8 of them they casted. That was my second go around with that. And then this last year, we were up on the west side of Mount Adams on another BFRO trip, and I've really been into drones and stuff, helicopter remote control airplanes when I was a kid, and kind of went to helicopters, and I got into the drones and stuff. Well, I went and bought a thermal drone. So I was out there flying that around, and the first night out was kind of uneventful. We seen something coming up the hill towards camp. It was pretty good size, but I just couldn't, through the thick brush and stuff, I just couldn't make out what it was. But the second night out, I ended up having a pretty good encounter where I got this one on videotape. I got it on thermal, and it appears to be, I don't know if did I send those pictures to you?
You know, I don't think I got everything from you last time that we talked. We talked a lot about it, but I don't think I ever got it in the email.
Oh, you didn't? Okay. Well, shoot, I'll have to get that to you. But anyway, the second night out, I was following the East team out, and there was some ponds down in that area. And I was about down to my last 10 minutes of flight time. I was about a mile and a half out. So I was flying back, and our South team was starting to have some activity, and they were right behind us. And we had kind of 100, but there was a hill behind us. It was fairly steep, but not that steep. Went up about 100 yards, then it leveled out pretty good. But so coming back, I noticed these two figures that were standing in the trees. There was 3 meadows right in a row. And in this first meadow, in the tree line, we noticed 2 figures. There was 4 of us looking at this on the screen. And I was on white hot settings. There was 4, or there's 4 of us watching it. There was 2 individuals in the trees. And as I got closer and closer, they walked out of the trees into the middle of this meadow. And I started flying down on them because I was like, wow, look at that, you know. And then, but for some reason, I wasn't recording at that time. I don't know. I was just so mesmerized, I guess. I don't know what I was thinking on this one. But so as I was flying down to them, they stopped. And they both knelt down in the middle of the meadow. So I hit record because one was bigger than the other. So I got them on white hot for about 2 minutes, and then I switched over to heat seek, which it kind of dances around the body. The hottest part of the body, it'll pick up. So the heat's always moving. As it moves, it picks up that. So I got probably about a minute and a half of that. And then, yeah, I was about out of battery time. So I thought, well, I should have stayed on station and just ran it right down, even if I had to land it somewhere and go get it. I should have just stayed right there. But I thought, well, I'll just sneak back here, put a battery in it, and I'll fly right back there and get them again. And my drones have about a 40-minute flight time. So I would have had plenty of time. I could have stayed there for at least 30 minutes filming. But so I did a NASCAR battery swap. Like, man, Dale Earnhardt would have been proud of this one, man, because this thing didn't even hardly hit the ground. I had the battery out, new battery in, and started up, and I don't even think the prop stopped on this thing. So I had it back in the air, and I went up there, and they were gone. So I think as soon as that drone left, they took off. But I looked around for, I don't know, over an hour. I just flew up around those 3 meadows and just never seen them again. So I guess hindsight's 50-50, I guess, but. So the next day, we went and did a recreation of this with Scott Taylor. So he went up there and he found that exact spot. And Scott Taylor was about the size. Oh, the 2 individuals that we seen, one looks like a female holding an infant with a juvenile off to her right side. And so went there and took a picture of him, you know, in the same meadow, kind of recreated the whole thing. He's about the same size as the juvenile is. So we're thinking this female is around an 8 foot. She's about 8 foot tall. And we also found some foot tracks up there from the female, but the best one we found was 15 inches long and it was 7 inches wide. And you can see all the toes. You can see it's just a perfect footprint. And it's a left footprint is what it is. But and then we got 3 or 4 of the juvenile that were fairly good. I don't know. You can definitely see the foot in a couple of them. The toes weren't real pronounced. I don't know why, but so anyway, yeah, that's pretty much the extent of my Bigfoot outings. We have 3 more coming up this year that we're going to go on. We're going to go up into the Blues on one, and you know, a couple up in between Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams again. We got a couple, I think, coming up in there. So it'll be South Central Washington somewhere. I'm not really sure where they're going to be. I'm just kind of guessing, but anyway. So that's about the extent of my Bigfoot.
Yeah, that's some
sighting
wild.
so far.
That's some wild stuff, Henry. That video that you took, is that available to see anywhere on the internet yet, or?
Well, no, because I don't know. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to put it on. I don't know. You put it on a Bigfoot podcast somewhere,
Or like, I wasn't sure if you had it like on a YouTube channel or anything like that.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Wow. Okay. The first sighting that you had during the turkey hunting, it sounds like
Right.
you had a really good view of what was going on, or of them themselves. Would you categorize what you saw? Are you even able to categorize what you saw? Was it more ape-like, or was it more human-like, or something completely different than those two?
You know, man, I have thought about that and thought about it. And I've had so many people ask me that question. And I'm just like, I don't. It didn't have a cone head. Neither one of them had a cone head. They were round. They looked round to me. But on the other hand, I wasn't there observing a beauty contest either. You know what I mean? I was just watching them to see what. I was pretty scared, man. I spent 7.5 years in the Army infantry, and I don't think I've been ever that scared in the Army. I mean, this one scared me, man. So I was like, this could be life ending. If they find out I'm here, I honestly don't think they even knew I was there. Because what I think happened, I think when I got out of the truck in the dark, I think they were coming down the creek. And when I turned and went up that intersection, instead of going, if I would have went to that second landing where I was going to go and drop down the creek and go up to I would have ran straight into them. There was no doubt in my mind I'd have been face to face with them, because they were right where I was going to go through. So that's one thing that kind of, I don't know, something saved me on that one. But at the last minute, when I turned and went up that intersection, I actually think that they were coming down the creek, and I think we passed each other. And when I crossed over behind them, I had the wind in my face for one. And I think probably the male seen that blind and walked over to it. And I think that's how the sticks ended up on the ground behind the door. I think he reached up there and grabbed him and looked inside and seen it was empty and just dropped those sticks right there. That's what I think happened. And then they walked down.
Yeah.
Huh? So I think they already kind of figured that they had their backs already cleared, you know, like they've already cleared the way, like everything is safe. They were just kind of looking down the creek and up on the side of the hills and stuff. But I honestly think they were migrating back to Mount Adams myself. I mean, it was springtime. I guess it would be the elk had moved out. They were moving out, heading back. So I think they were just kind of moving along with them or heading wherever they were going. And I think he was hollering out to more like them, like a rendezvous point or something, or seeing where everybody else was at. Or I have no idea what he was doing. But
that whole area is so wild, and it's come up, you know, a few different episodes over the last months. I believe there's been some individuals on that have shared about BFRO expeditions west of Mount Adams, over by, well, we'll just say west of Mount Adams. Henry, yeah. I hope that someday someone takes you up on checking out that area by Mount Adams, though. That sounds like a very cool place to try to get some people to research with you in, you know, maybe some researchers that you have connections with through BFRO or something like that.
Oh yeah. Well, I've learned a lot. I have learned. It's been a pretty steep learning curve since August of 23 on how it all works. On the expeditions, and I've met a lot of interesting people. We've been to quite a few conferences. We just got back from the one from Longview just a couple of weeks ago, the Squatch Fest.
Yep.
In Longview, which was really good. I met the guys from Flash of Beauty. They were up there. I talked to them. I was interested. Shane Corson was up there. Yeah, it's just been pretty interesting. The one thing that kind of disappoints me about this whole thing is I've learned at the Bigfoot Society, they eat their own, man. Well, I mean, they really do.
Maybe we could say Bigfoot community. I would hope that the
the Bigfoot community is right. What I'm saying.
Yeah. The Bigfoot Society is my podcast, but no, I totally get it. It can be a very.
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, you're good. But yeah, it can get wild.
So I didn't even think about that.
No, you're good. Yeah, it can be dog eat dog, and there's not a lot of people working together. You know what I mean?
No, and that's what that's kind of what disappointed me when I got into all this. I thought, man, this can be really cool, but it's like this group is on their own, that group's on their own, and if this group gets evidence, then this group attacks them, and that's just fake, and then this group gets it, and then it's just like this vicious circle, and it's like a constant. It seems like it's just I don't know. It just seems like it's a constant fight,
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's just different. It's a lot different than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I think if we're going to get to the point where stuff is actually gonna, things are gonna start to come out, I think certain groups will have to start working together. And the tricky thing is that there's a lot of egos in the field. So you've got some people where they're like, I don't want to share information, and then it's just interesting, because sometimes you do have to keep places not really talked about, so that it doesn't get flooded by like 1,000 people, and then blows the chance where you could be observing
right,
so that it's a tricky back and forth, you know what I mean? But I think there needs to be more working between groups. Absolutely. So
yeah, absolutely. It just totally caught me off guard on how that whole thing kind of works and comes together, but I guess it is what it is. I'm kind of in my own private group now. Mm-hmm. I mean, we do the BFRO expeditions too, but we have kind of formed our own little private group, and we'll see what happens this year. It's going to be interesting. I mean, I learned a lot last year too. So in 24, and now I've got 2 thermal drones now. So
oh, nice. That's awesome. Before I let you go, would you ever want to have a sighting experience like you had during that turkey hunt again? Would you ever want to experience that again, or was that too much?
Well, at the time, you know what? Actually, yes, I would, because at the time I wasn't expecting it. Bigfoot wasn't even on my freaking radar at that point, I had that wasn't even in my outer banks of my memory thought, so, I just wanted to kill him, I mean, if they were going to come at me, I was just going to start shooting, I wasn't going to mess around.
Sure.
But now that I know, it's just like at the cabin, in 22, I didn't really know much about these things. I figured we were about to get attacked, and I'd rather attack than be attacked. So I thought, well, let's just go get it, let's get it over with. But now that I know what I know on how these things work, after going to expeditions and talking to these people, and, when they holler like that, they're just mad about something. And I think what happened was, I think it was down there by the creek watching the boys, and I think it got a little too close to the boys got a little too close to it. So I think it started barking at them like a dog to get them to back up, and they didn't, and that's when it growled at them, and that's when they took off. And when I went down there, I think it went up the hill a little ways by the cabin and was kind of observing. And then the boys stepped out of the cabin with their ARs and rifles and started shooting into that bank. And I think that's what made it mad, looking back on it. So I think it was just mad because, they were out there making that noise and kind of shooting at it, I guess.
Right.
I mean, they weren't shooting at it. They were just shooting into a bank, but they were shooting in the general area. So I think it made it mad, really.
Mm. Yeah.
But not realizing that at the time. But now I do kind of realize what happened. I would never shoot one now. I mean, absolutely not. Knowing when I know, talking to the researchers and other people's experiences and what happens when they do this and that. And I don't think they're here to hurt anybody. I've never really heard of an attack. I've only heard of one attack. That was up by Cougar, Washington.
Okay.
So where a hunter was killed.
Oh, wow.
So, but I think he shot a Bigfoot, and it killed him. So, yeah, and that was I heard that on, I think, the Lynn Smith show, and that was the sheriff out of Skamania County had to deal with that one. So,
Gotcha.
That was back in I don't know if you've ever heard that one or not, but.
I haven't. I'm gonna have to look and see if I can track that one down. I know of that show, but I've never heard that particular one. That's very interesting. But Henry, it sounds like you're definitely getting into the thick of things, and you're starting to figure some stuff out. I mean, you've got 3 expeditions you're going on this year, which that's amazing. And I would say definitely keep me up to date and in the loop with what you continue to learn as you continue to go down this road. You're getting into some cool stuff.
Yeah, and I'll see you down in Oak Ridge.
Oh, will you? That's awesome.
Are you heading down there this year?
Yeah, dude, I'll be there. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
that's
nice.
Great.
Yeah, I wanted to go last year, but work constraints, I ended up not being able to go. But I'm going this year. I don't care.
That's
I'm
awesome.
going down to Oak Ridge this year. That's one of the festivals I really want to go to.
It's such a good time. It's an incredible experience, and there's a lot of really, really cool people that I met. Oak Ridge is awesome. So, and it's outside of fire season this year. It's a little bit earlier, so that'll be nice too. But yeah, no, I'll I'm looking forward to meeting you there, Henry. It'll be a good time, and I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing what you've experienced over the years, man.
Okay, well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's pretty good to get that experience out there, and So anyway.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed. Share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. The Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKinsey Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one if you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.